All right, we're at the point where you should have completed everything in HTML and basic CSS. You should feel pretty good about yourself. That's pretty great. I had a question from a couple learners that they had the same question. I think it's a very good one. We're supposed to be implementing all of these, everything that we learn into our glitch page. Everything that we learn, we just copy and paste and put the things in and understand that, as we're doing our interest page, we're adapting it, we're making it our own thing, but we're taking each individual thing that we're learning and doing an example on our glitch page. And this is for, this page isn't really going to be something that's, you're super proud of and it goes on the web. Of course, you're going to put all the love and attention you can into it. But really, the best thing that this page can serve as is a reference for all the things that you've learned, because it's easier to go and look back at your code and say, hey, okay, this is how I did it here, than it is to try and find the free code camp lesson and copy and paste it and then apply it to something of your own. So at the end of CSS, we're introduced to the concept of variables. And I like this because this is your first, what I would consider real programming concept. What we've done with HTML and CSS is we've built some sort of ground layer of presenting things. It's very valuable because you're going to make choices. You're gonna learn new techniques and things, and you want to see the results. So HTML and CSS lets us see the results in a browser. And I think a lot of us have been saying, this is pretty cool, and that's the feedback I've been getting. So I know that that's what excites me, is to make a change in something and then see its outcome. But with CSS variables, the question that was posed to me was, well, how do I just set up a variable in CSS. How do I use it, and when would I ever use it? And so I want to show how you would use CSS variables in a very real application. I think I'll start just giving you an overview of my glitch page now, and then we're going to refactor it pretty heavily and put these practices in place. I think this is going to be a lot of fun. I'm excited. So this is what your glitch page should look like. You should have head up here, head tags right there, and it'll close down here. And within the head, you've got after this other stuff here, these style sheets and scripts. These were included with your glitch program. You might have deleted these, and that's okay. But if they're still there, your style would go right after it. And this is what you've been messing around with. You've been adding some stuff to style. Here you can see in my application, I've made a very basic looking but clean looking website where I give a little description of the video game and a little quiz and 2 buttons at the bottom. I actually don't know if you've learned the button HTML element in Free Code Camp yet, but now you are. Now you know that that's an element that you can use. Just like so many things like main or footer. These are HTML elements that you can use. And button has a lot of its own things associated with it. I use it because it's more realistic than using input type equals submit. That's used often in forms, but here we need 2 different types of buttons. So I'm going to use the button element here, and just to give you a taste of what that's like. It's really no different than styling any other element, though. So you can see what I've got going on with my button. I've got some padding, 8 pixels vertically and 16 pixels horizontally. Font size 16 pixels. Cursor pointer, that's how it changes into a little hand when you hover over something. Margin right, that's to give a little space between these things. No border on these. And the color of the font is white, and the background color is this, which turns out to be a dark blue. The other thing you'll notice is I'm also using a pseudo class of hover. So when you hover over something, it changes the background color. It's a nice feature of buttons, or a nice feature of your UI to do that with links, with buttons, anything anyone hovers over and lets them know that, hey, this is something I can select. So I'd like to talk about what the realistic expectations are. It's not very realistic to have all these hex codes. I don't know what this means just looking at it. No one has memorized hex codes. So you want to replace these with something more readable. And you don't want to use just the standard, like if I just said blue here, right? Well, that might not match the brand that it's a really bright blue. It just might not match the brand that the designers and the product builders of the application have given you. And when you work in a company as a programmer, you have to collaborate with product designers, UI people, UX researchers, even just the CEO might have some whims that you have to abide by. So, or the marketing people especially would say, "Oh, we need this color scheme and blah blah blah." So I want to give you an example of what that looks like in the real world. This is a good just screenshot overview of a brand guidelines for a company. I think it's called Up Crunch. Yep. And they have their main colors, which is like this purple indigo thing, and then a lighter purple here. They have like what's called I don't know, the hero, the sage. I don't know what these really are, but this is all part of their brand. And then they have their logo here. They have some icons showing some icons. I think what's really interesting, though, and what we're going to talk about just now is this idea of a color palette. They've decided what colors should go in the application, what you should use. You can't just willy-nilly put in whatever colors you want. And you can see here, this is very valuable. Shows these are the different shades and tints. Shades is dark and tints is the lighter versions. But basically, it's going from very light to very dark, and what that means for this company. So here's like their gray or their neutral. I think they're calling it Haiti. I don't know. And this one looks like cornflower blue, cyan, and Athens gray. So I think this is Haiti. The font is kind of small here for me to read. But that's what they've decided is their main color palette. And so the designer comes up with that. As a programmer, you could explore this stuff if you want. I've been down that rabbit hole. It's a long rabbit hole. Luminescence, brightness, all this weird stuff you have to think about. Let's look at another example. This is actually a very big company. It's called SAP. And they have, they allow companies to build websites, and so they're very big on their documentation of how things should be presented to maintain this SAP brand, even though lots of different folks can have their hands on creating dashboards and stuff like this. So you look at this red, 21 days overdue. You got this green here, the blue. You got a lighter blue shade up here. Here you got a great little three. It's like a pie chart kind of graph, but with 3 different contrast ratios that's a great way of displaying data like that. And then they've got some orange here to illustrate something or other. Here's another example of what they call a multi-instance layout. So now you're selling products or something. If you're designing that sort of page, they've got a light blue and the blue borders and a dark blue button and a dark blue-gray header. You might think to yourself, is this all a whim? No, this is all created by people that know the theory behind this and know that this stuff looks good. And they actually end up producing these color palettes. So they have got, SAP UI chart palette sequential hue 1 light 3. Pretty bad name in my mind, but that's what they use to build their application. And it translates to this hex code, and that should look familiar to you because when you go over here, that's what we're using. Hex codes. But again, I'll never know this as a programmer, what that means. Finally, the best example, the easiest example to understand what's going on is Google's material design from 2014. Here you can see they have a light shade, and they just give them a name. So this is red 50, this is red 100, all the way to red 900. And then you have red accent 100, red accent 200. So the accents are just slight variations on things to make them stand out. But the main point is when you're designing a page like this, you can see all these different tints and shades. And so this would be light, let's say this would be like blue 200, and then the border around it would be blue 400, and then this might be blue 500 here. And with material design, they give 10 different core shades and tints, so it's 50 to 900 there. That's what they have, and they go all the way down through the whole spectrum. I've used this color palette. I think it's very helpful. There's other palettes. I own this book, Refactoring UI, which has a bunch of example color palettes. And here's, just for an example, color palette 9. And here's like the primary color. This is like the blue call to action button you see right here. They've got some cool grays. Here they list the hex. They don't really give you the 100 through 900. Actually, this would be like, again, 50, 100, 200 to 900. And then you go down, here's their supporting colors. They just put them in a little smaller space. So what this translates into a real application for a programmer, we use these, and we have to come up with names. This is in my in production application. This is an application that I have students at PunchCode build as they're learning this stuff. And you can see that I just call them blue 50, blue 100. So now every time you are using this hex code, you use the variable name blue 050 instead of all of this. And that's a little easier to remember because it always goes lightest to darkest. 100, it goes 100 is like is second to lightest, and 50 is like so unbelievably light that you shouldn't use it. It's hard to see. But it's needed in some spots. So, and if I'm a designer on this project, I've served as designer on other projects. The reason we use this numbering system is because maybe sometimes we need a number between 400 and 500. We just do. We're designing this complex thing and needs one shade in between there. Well, then I would create 450, and I would just slap it in there, and it would be somewhere between these two different yellow colors. So again, it's called headroom, leaving yourself room to add more things. This is literally leaving about 100 different colors between these things. You're never really going to use that. This is probably the extent that you're going to see in any application that you work on with a professional designer. You're going to see about 10 different tints and shades with each core color, right? Blue, yellow, purple, teal, gray. So in this application I'm working on, I have blue, yellow, purple, teal, gray, and I'll show you that application and why that matters. Let's look here. This is the app I have students start working on at the PunchCode coding school, and you can see when I hover over archive, it's got a light purple in the background, and then if you look at these icons, they actually darken when you hover over it. The text darkens too. That's a little harder to notice, but the whole thing darkens. And then when you click on it, there it is. It stays darkened. And I can go back to today, or down to completed, and completed again. It darkens. The icon darkens, and the little background turns into a dark green. Hovering over an icon, these also darken. Hovering over edit also darkens. The edit button. So that's the kind of normal, we just expect this kind of behavior in applications, but really it takes 10 different tints and shades of yellow to get to this spot. You can't just have one yellow and it just looks gross. It kind of feels really good. It feels more modern to have this kind of thing. It's done by a real designer. And that's the case. You're going to be working often with a real designer or with a company that's paid someone to come up with these color palettes, and then the marketing person perhaps has done it, and then you have to implement it. And what that means in terms of implementing it is just like this. This is actual code from this application you just saw. Just to prove that, I think I can change, blue 50. And like I said, I often use bright red or bright green. Yeah, there it is. Just to so I can very clearly see that I've made a change. So you can see that that's when I make a change to that actual thing there, it's affecting It's affecting the background. And this is really great because when I am when I'm building out the application and I need something to happen, I don't give it the hex color. I say no, the icon, today icon, which is, let's look at completed. I'll show you a today icon. This is the today icon. The today icon has a primary fill of blue 400, a secondary fill of blue 600. Let's see if we can zoom that up. So the primary fill is this lighter blue, and the secondary fill is the little hooks and the little date, right? However, when I hover over it, the primary fill turns into 700 and the secondary fill turns into 900, and you can see it get darker when I hover over that. Now that's this is actually written in a programming language called SCSS, which compiles to CSS. So that's why I can do this fancy and hover within this group. Within this class. So you can't really do just exactly this in CSS, but I'm going to show you how it's done in CSS. But this is just to show you a real world example. This is how it's actually done in the real world. We need to use variables. I can't be typing this hex code every single time. The other great thing about using variables is now, like I said, when I change these blues, if we shift all of the blue hues up to a more purpley style blue, well, the whole application just recognizes it. It reads from those variables. So it's a good way to efficiently set up your variables once and then call them throughout the application. And I'm going to show you how I do that here. So this is a good way to apply these last free Code Camp CSS challenges to your own page. I'm going to introduce a new concept to you. It's called root. And this is a CSS selector. You can look at the MDM docs. And by the way, a lot of times if I have a question about anything with HTML, CSS, or JavaScript, in my Google search, I include the word MDM. So I could literally type in root CSS MDN, and that gets me this first thing that I was just looking at. So let's look at that. This matches the root element of a tree representing the document. In HTML, root represents the HTML element and is identical to the selector HTML, except that its specificity is higher. So it's like the bottom of the bottom. It's where you want to be if you want to set global variables. That's how I would understand it. So that's why we created the root here. And now this is where you can create variables. And you learn this in your free Code Camp thing, how to create a custom CSS variable. And this is where you can see that this right here, let's say these are all of our blues. Now, this isn't proper CSS. To declare a CSS variable, if you do the lesson, you'll know that it's 2 dashes, not just the $sign here. The $sign is a SCSS feature. Small difference in the two languages, not a big deal. I'm going to show you a trick. I'm hitting Control D right now, and on a Mac, I think it's Command D, and that just selects all the similar elements until you say stop, and then you can just type what you want. So I'm going to type dash, and then I'm going to type escape. So now I've effectively, what if I hit format this file? What's it do? Yay! So if I hit format this file, it just prettifies, it just lines all those things up that weren't lined up before. So now I've just declared my entire color palette, this blue palette at least, in my root, so I can use these variables. And that's really great. Oh, sorry, here, this is a mistake. I'm going to get to that later. So what we can do is instead of this background color 09672, we can look for it up here. Here it is. It's blue 500. Now to call a variable in CSS, you've got to do a little different syntax. You have to say var, this is short for variable, and then you give it some parentheses, and then you paste your variable. And there it is. And now if I'm wondering if that even worked correctly, what I can do is I can set it to something really low, like 100, and that should be very light. You see how these are now very light buttons. Great. So we know that var 500 is going to get us the color we want. And what about this one, this background color? 01337D. Here it is. That's blue 800. So I do the same thing. I do var -- blue 800. And now when I hover over these things, it'll be the blue 800 color, nice and dark. Gives me that good feeling of hovering over these things. So our next step would be to say, okay, we've put in these blues, but I don't want reset the quiz and submit your answer to be the same color. Reset the quiz is a destructive action that it'll clear out all their answers. I mean, in the hypothetical application we're building, it'll clear out all the answers from the user. So we need something, we want a destructive red color. So what I would do is I would actually make a button class, button, and the class name would be something like danger. So now we've made a class called danger, but it says it has to be with a button. And then we can do background color. I'm just testing it out just to make sure this works. I always do this stuff first. Background color red, button danger. So now let's go to our button and give it a class. Class equals danger. There it is, except I put it on the wrong one. So let's just, there we go. There we go, red, danger. Except my designer is mad at me because that is not the red that they chose for their design. So I have to say, okay, what is the red you chose? Well, I don't have a good example of red right here, so we'll just use our purple. Let's say, yeah, we use purple for our danger messages. Not really recommended, but okay. And again, what I'm going to do is select this $, press Control D for the rest of them, hit a double dash there, and then Control, and then just hit Escape, frankly. And then I can hit Format this file, and bing, it'll line everything up all pretty and give me the confetti. So now we've got this purple that we want to use for this danger style. And they want to say, no, it's got to be danger. It's got to be that purple 500. Okay, so I would just do var -- purple 500. There it is, reset the quiz, purple 500. But you notice it doesn't have the hover, so we want to do the hover. So we do button danger hover. That's called a pseudo selector, maybe. I think so. And then we do background color, and here you would do, well, we want purple 800 to match that blue 800. So var purple 800. Okay, so now when I hover over it, it should give me a dark purple, and it does. And now this matches the color scheme that the designer gave us, and they're very happy, and the brand is happy, and the company is happy, and everyone's happy, and I get a big raise. But there's more to do here. This is where I want to say, okay, it's not really good enough for me to say the button is always going to have the blue background color. I think the button should have a class. And we should, let me show you what I'm thinking here. I'm thinking the button, and we're going to call this primary. A button with a class name of primary should have a background of that blue. Okay, and you can see now that that color went away. It's kind of like this light gray, non-existent color. That's the default. So we're just going to put the class of primary on this. There you go. Now it works. And we need to change that hover as well. Copy that. And we can go hover and make that 800 like everything else. Now we don't need this standard button hover because we've got it covered with our two cases. This simply means that every button now must have a class. And I think that that's important and that's okay. Because you're defining the functionality of the button with class now. You're saying, this is a danger button. Reset the quiz is a danger button. And you're saying that this is a primary button. It's a button you're going to use often. You'll also have secondary and maybe even tertiary buttons. You might have success buttons. You might have info buttons. There's a couple other types that you could create. They become your generic styles that you would use for buttons. And I recommend that sort of naming convention. You never want a class that's something like, class for the submit button or class for the reset button, because you might change you want to use it in other places, but you also might change the terminology on the buttons. So you use these kind of generic names for things, but that still have some meaning, but they could be applied in so many places. So primary and danger are good indications of that. And now you know that the whole button element here has all this stuff. Every button is going to look like, with this padding, with this font size, and I have a white text on it. You could change that. You could have, button be, very basic, maybe just eliminating the border and then saying something like another class called button rectangular and give it that, and then you have another class called button rounded and you would give it different properties. So that's I don't want to get too far into it, but that's like the long and short of it, like breaking these things out into different classes and then applying those classes in your HTML as needed. So this reads very nicely from a reading code perspective. I have a button, class of danger, reset the quiz. Yeah, all right. Primary right there. What else goes very good with these variables? We've done colors, but can you think of anything else? Well, one way I think of other things is to look for repetition inside of my CSS. And the other thing is to look for fragility inside of my CSS. When I look at something like 16 pixels or 8 pixels or 16 pixels here, I actually don't like that. I'd rather spacing itself fit a system. There's, you can look at these, these style guides, but what they have, they actually have a spacing system happening in the same way. You can't just make something 7 pixels here and then 13 pixels here or whatever. I'm just going to do this real quick. I haven't done this. Spacing. If I just type that in, what comes up? Oh. Responsive spacing system. So that's basically, it's not quite what I want. I know what that is, but hold on, I thought something caught my eye. Responsive padding and margin classes. No, that's not what I want. Let's go back one more, and we'll give up on this. A good example might be with Get Bootstrap, which you're going to get familiar with in just a day or two. Let's look at documentation here, and let's look at spacing. And so they've got all these spacer classes that they've built. But the reason they do this is so that you're always spacing in an amount that is relative to the base space. That sounds complicated, so I'm just going to give you an example. If we look at this little CSS that I've written here, we see some numbers that are repeated. 16 pixels, 32 pixels, 8 pixels, 16 pixels. 0 pixels doesn't really count. So we can get that, hey, maybe instead of hard coding 16 and 32 here, maybe we can make variables for spacing. And I think that's exactly the right approach to take. Size, let's say like the middle size. If we have a system that's like size 0 to 9 or something, like colors went from 050 all the way up to 900. Sizes, we could do the same thing, but we don't really need thousands of different sizes. We can stick with like a base, like just 10 different sizes. So size 4, let's say we would say would be our base. 16 pixels, we use that most often. Great. And then we could do size 5, we could just go up 8 pixels, right? So we could go 24 pixels. And then size 6, 32 pixels. And then we can go, likewise down. Size 3, and that could be 8 pixels. We can just go 8 pixel increments. And with size, 2 and 1, it might be something ridiculous like 4 pixels and 2 pixels or something like that, But we don't have to do that here because this covers the sizes that we need. Again, the designer will give you a full-on size and spacing system. And it's up to you, the developer, just to implement it in code. And so this is one way to do it, is with CSS variables. There's many other ways of doing this, but this is what we're learning now, and this is introducing the concept of variables, which I really like. So we have these things. And so now what you would do is basically anytime you would see 32 pixels, or here we see 16 pixels, right? You can't just say, size 4, it's not going to work. And you notice we lost all of our margin here. You remember you need to declare it by saying var size 4. That tells it that it's a CSS variable. CSS variables are relatively new to CSS, which is why they're not accepted in Internet Explorer, which has stopped all development of new features and all security enhancements, and generally not recommended for anyone to use it in Internet Explorer, but people still do. So var, we've now set to size 4, which you can see is 16 pixels, which is what we had it. So let's replace this 32 pixels with the same thing. Let's go, var -- 32 pixels is size 6. And there it is. That quiz moved down 32 pixels, okay? Now here, again, we have padding. We have two things. Can we do it here? Yes, you can. So this is var, and the 8 pixels is size 3, -- size 3. And you have to use that -- just because that's how CSS interprets variables. So here we'll do it again. Var, this will be size 4. -- size -4. And you can see the buttons look back to normal how they were. If I didn't have that one, they would reduce a little bit of the margins on the end, but we're going to put that back. Font size, same way, right? We can do, let's just copy and paste this. Var size 4, copy there. And margin right. Var size 4, copy there. Okay, so everything's now back to normal. Now if I ever changed one of these variables, if I ever said, no, actually we want to do a 12 pixel there, well, it would reduce that space just a little bit. 16 pixels there. Let's do a couple other things just to standardize this. This is, what is this? I right-clicked and I hit inspect to see what this is. This is an H3, even though I could have just looked at my own code, so I'll just do that from now on. I've got H3, H5, H2. So one thing I would do is I would say, I would standardize some of my sizes. H2, let's do font size var dash size 6. Oops, size dash 6. There we go. There it is. A little bigger. That's what I expected. Okay. And let's do H3, font size var dash size. We're just going down a size for H3. There we go, size 5. And then let's do P, our paragraph elements, and also H6. So you can use the comma to do two things at once. And font size var dash size 4. Okay, that's 16 pixels, and that didn't change because that's what it was. So now I've kind of cleaned up I've kind of standardized things, because we were just using the browser defaults for whatever those sizes are, but now our design team has come in and said, you must use 18, 16, 24, or 32 pixels. That's what you must use. And I think that's fine. I think this actually looks more professional like that. But I want to show you the final bit of refactoring that we can do here, which hopefully blows your mind just a little bit. We don't need to, if you know our base size here is this, 16 pixels. We'll say that's our base size. That's what our main font size was. That's what a single gap between here is. It's what the gap between here is, 16 pixels. That's like what we would consider like our base size. So what we can do is we can actually declare a variable called base size and say that it is worth 16 pixels. Okay. Size 4 now, you see that gap has gone away. That's how we know we've deleted something there. We can actually do var dot size 4. What am I missing here? You can probably see this faster than I can. Oh, it's not that's not what I wanted. I needed base size. Okay. That was boneheaded. There we go. So I declared base size up here to be 16. And then I said size 4 is going to be that right? Calling that variable of 16. But this is important because now we don't have to define size 5 as 24 pixels. We can actually define it as a number relative to the base size. So 24 divided by 16 is 1.5. So can you imagine taking the base size that we have here and multiplying it by 1.5? That'll give us exactly what we need. To do that, it's a little more complicated. You're going to use a function called calc. It's just like this var. It's a way to read. It's a way to do more complicated things in CSS, and I've got it right here. You can look again. You just type in calc CSS MDM. MDM stands for Mozilla Developer Network, I think. And they're the go-to source for everything web development: JavaScript, HTML, CSS. So you can see that this lets you perform calculations when specifying CSS property values. And look, they give you an example right here. Here's how you could use a variable and do some math to it and end up being the resulting calculation. So what do we want to do? We want to multiply times one. We want to say 1.5 times that base size. How do we call that base size? We actually go var, just like we did every other time, base size. All right. So that's looking sharp. What was size 5 on here? Nothing. Oh yeah, H3. The H3 size. That didn't work out quite well enough because it looks a little smaller than it was. So let me just go back to 24 pixels. There it is. 24 pixels works. Let's go back to Control Z. What did I have? I missed, here's something. I had some broken code, but it wasn't telling me. I missed a semicolon. Put that semicolon in, it completes this calculation. That's how it knows to keep running the calculation. There we go. So I've got 1.5 times this base size, which is up here 16 pixels. So 1.5 times 16 we saw was 24. So that's 24 pixels. And we don't have to, CSS is smart in that we don't have to put pixels anywhere here. It knows that it's working in this pixels sort of value. So looking at something like 32 pixels, what's that in relation to 16? Well, it's actually times 2. So we can go calc 2 times, and then we got to pull in that variable again. So we go var. Yeah, the word is variable, but programmers say var. It's just like how you should say GIF. I don't care what you say. If you say GIF or GIF, it doesn't matter to me. I say GIF because I learned the word when I was 9 years old. So that's my excuse. And so now this size 6, this 32, matches exactly the size of the heading. This is now, if you look at H3, the font size is size 5. Oh, sorry, H3 is right here. H1 is what I'm talking. H2, well, sorry, this is H2. And again, you can know that. You can look at your code. H2, there it is. H2 is right up here. There it is, size 6. Okay, and the space between quiz and this is also 32. So that's 32 and that's 32. Good. We have one more to go. What's the relationship between 8 and 16? 8 divided by 16 is 0.5. So you can go calc 0.5 times, and then you got to call your base variable again. So it's var dash base size, and it's all working. The very powerful thing about this, now that you've converted all of your sizes to be relative to one another, to respect the base size, is that if your website, if your designer says, ooh, we can't fit all this, we need to have smaller text and smaller margins and all this other stuff, you can just say change it to 12. And if you look, the text just changed, the space changed. I noticed these radio buttons did not change, so we would want to address that. We would want to say something like input. Are these inputs? What are these? These are label. There it is. Label, change the size. So that's H6. Yep. So that's how you do it. And they say, oh no, we actually we want to blow that up much larger. Let's go to 20 pixels. Okay. Now everything is blown up, but not only that, but the relationships. So you've blown up the text here, the heading here, the space between here, the margins here. It looks good. It's all the same relatively, but it really is 20 pixels now instead of 16. Going back to our 16, oops. There we go, going back to our 16. There it is, everything looks nice and well put together. So that's the reality of it. That's how you can use CSS variables in your application. And anytime you find yourself in CSS using specific pixels, this should go up 4 pixels or 8 pixels or whatever, you actually want to dial that back and say, okay, can I convert those pixels to the size variables? So can I create a base size? 16 pixels is often used as a good base size. Okay, and if this needs to be 4 pixels, well then I could create a base size of size 2, and that would just be calc, like 0.25 times var base size, and don't forget your colon or your semicolon there. So now I've got it. This is like a 4 pixel thing, and if it helps, you could actually just do you could leave yourself some comments and say 4 pixels, something like that. I want to say that I do that in my I don't know that I do that in. So again, I'm using SCSS, and it's the same kind of concept. It just allows you to do math without doing that calc function. It's a little cleaner. But basically it's the same thing. I have spacer times 0.25, spacer times 5, spacer times 1.5, spacer times 3. And your spacer is 1 RAM. That's something that just means a relative M. It really just means 16 pixels. We'll go over rem and m later on. But really, I could change this to 16 pixels and it wouldn't change anything. So again, if you need to help yourself out, you could put inside comments inside of your CSS. You can say, hey, this is what I expect it to be. Just know that your comments will be out of date if you go ahead and change the whole base measurement. But that's the power of it, is that your designers will come back and say, yeah, this 16 pixels is actually too much space for us. We need to go to 14 pixels. I've actually had that happen to me. So we go to 14 pixels and boom, there it is. Your job as a programmer is done in 5 minutes and everyone thinks you're brilliant, but it's because you set this all up ahead of time. Because they would think to themselves, oh, you got to change it on every single thing. Oh, it's going to take you 2 weeks. That's when you say, yes, it's going to take me 2 weeks, and you do it in 5 minutes, but you don't deliver it until 2 weeks, and you take a vacation for 2 weeks. I'm just kidding. That's unethical. You would want to actually just do it in 5 minutes and then go back to some old code and refactor it or take on a new feature. But I do know programmers that do the first thing. So that is a good way to add CSS variables to your project. And you can see how we refactored so that we're never using specific values inside of our CSS. We're never calling a hex, a color hex. Those things, you can miss a character and suddenly something's the wrong color, and moving stuff around by pixels is also something you want to avoid. You want to set up a spacing system. The one I laid out here, 4, 8, 16, 24, 32, pretty industry standard. And again, your last one here, size 1, would be something like 2 pixels in case you just need to bump something very small. But really something like this will get you just fine. That's the extent of what I want to talk about today, and I know that's quite a bit to take in, but using CSS variables is very cool. It's your first real programming concept. Everything else has been kind of memorizing the language, like I said, the ABCs, and now we're kind of constructing words, stuff that mean things. Blue 100 means something. BAE 3FF doesn't mean anything. So now we're writing the language of programming, and I'm really excited about it, and you're coming really far.